Recording in progress.
Yes, I'll be happy to take roll. One moment, please. Davison. Here. Fishman.
Here.
Hart.
Here.
Kirks.
Here.
Sturm. Great, we have 4 of our 5 committee members present. Mr. Sturm is absent and excused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I would like to ask for the committee's permission to move item, I believe it's 3. No, it's not 3. It's the approval of minutes, which is at the end of our agenda. Is it all right with the committee if we move that to before general public comment? Any objections? No. Great. Does anyone have corrections or changes to our draft minutes from Thursday, February 23rd, 2023?
May I ask a question? The minutes list people's names, but not the comments they made. Is that because it's all recorded as a video?
I'm sorry, would you be able to repeat that?
Yes, the draft minutes for February 23rd, 2023, it often shows just names of people and not the comments that they made. Is that because there's a video of the event?
So yes, these are action minutes and not verbatim minutes. So what happens is when the dialogue is occurring, there's a timestamp where at the beginning of the dialogue, and then as you see each name outlined, that just shows the progression of conversation. If you're able to have the past meeting video handy, you'll be able to pull up where that person spoke and then what part of the dialogue was occurring.
Thank you.
Yes, and it is hard to get used to action minutes as opposed to verbatim because it does not give you a lot of information, but it simply shows flow of the conversation for that one action item, that one piece of the meeting.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Hart? Great, thank you. Anyone else have questions or changes to the minutes? I have a couple, and perhaps you can take this from the recording and we'll move to approve the minutes as amended if the committee agrees. On page 2, under B, the draft minutes read, Susan Kirks nominated herself, comma, no other nominees. I'd like to ask you to change that to read, Susan Kirks offered to serve as chair, period. There were no objections. That's actually what did occur, so I don't recall nominating myself, but I did offer to serve, so that's one change. And then on the next page, under 5A, new business, the paragraph that reads, presented by staff liaison, Corey, there's a sentence there that says, if there are questions during the presentation, the committee member will raise their virtual hand and the Zoom moderator will call on that person. In our meeting, we actually set a dynamic that worked for the committee to be exchanging information and just asking, the question or unmuting and asking the question. So I'd like to ask that that sentence be changed to read, Chair Kirks asked committee members to pose questions during the presentation period. There was no objection. Okay?
Certainly, I can make those changes.
Is that agreeable with everyone on the committee? Would someone like to make a motion to approve our draft minutes as amended? I will. Thank you. Ms. Hart has made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Mr. Fishman has seconded the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections? No? Great. Thank you. The minutes are approved as amended, and if you could circulate the final copy to our committee members so that we can review it, that would be great. Thank you very much. Next is general public comment, and I will read the information that we always state during general public comment, although for the benefit of anyone who's watching this meeting after the fact, I'm not seeing any members of the general public in our audience. During general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the committee's subject matter jurisdiction and that are not listed on the current agenda. Public comments are limited up to 3 minutes per person. Depending on the number of persons wishing to address the committee, time will be allocated in equal shares totaling no more than 15 minutes. So I'd like to open general public comment. And seeing no members of the public in our audience, I will close general public comment. I would like to say that I hope in the future, since this committee meets only twice per year, that we can schedule the meeting on a day that's different from right after the city council meeting, and perhaps at a time when members of the public can attend. And did we receive any comments, written comments for this committee meeting prior to the meeting?
I did not. No comments were received.
Thank you very much. So next on our agenda is unfinished business, and we will be basically approving our statement of from our last meeting, from reviewing the fiscal year ended June 30, 2022 report or presentation that was given to us last meeting. And we have all reviewed the statement that was drafted for our committee, indicating that we reviewed the report, we asked questions and received responses. So is there a motion to approve the report and our statement as presented?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Is there a second? I'll second it. Thank you. The motion has been made by Mr. Fishman, seconded by Ms. Davidson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. That motion carries unanimously. And thank you to the staff for your diligence and for addressing all of our questions, and also the questions that came after that report. There were many questions that were posed, and I'm sure we all appreciate those responses. Okay. So next on our agenda is new business, Measure U biannual report overview for fiscal year ended June 30th. Oops, sorry, is that correct? Oh no, those were minutes, sorry. This is the upcoming fiscal year 2023-2024, the preliminary budget report. That's our next item on the agenda. So we'll defer to Corey then.
Thank you.
Corey, before you start, should our screens be active because we're blank?
Can our screen show just this, or is it showing anything?
They're blank.
Oh, yeah, they are blank. And also, while she's doing that, could I reread for the members of our committee and the public that we'll have a presentation on fiscal year 2022, 2023, mid-year update, and fiscal year 2023, 2024 preliminary budget report. And our dynamic here among committee members is it worked really well for us with the Zoom last time to say, excuse me, and ask a question with the presentation that you're giving rather than wait until the end of the presentation so that we can have a kind of a flow of questions and answers, if that's okay with you.
That's okay with me. If we can wait till I'm finished discussing the slide that we're on, it's a little easier for me so I can keep my train of thought as I'm going from slide to slide.
Okay, I think that's how we flowed last
Okay.
time. And of course, I think that's certainly understandable. And
Thank you.
we know you have a lot of information to provide to us and that you're thinking about. So, yes. And of course, if we're asking questions and the flow doesn't seem to work for you, just let us know.
Okay.
Just say, wait, could you wait for them again, or just ask us. Okay.
Thank you.
And again, we don't have anything on our screen, so thank you for asking that, Mr. Fishman.
Oh, okay.
Oh, she is. So should we wait for a
Are
moment?
your slides the same as this? No. Oh, so we can look this way at least.
Yeah, I can't see that. Oh, this is good. Oh, this would have been helpful to have at 5 o'clock.
So far, everybody's up at mine. I could move over here. Okay. Smooth that.
There's a power button, so you try to turn on right behind on the right, on the bottom.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm happy to be here this evening in person. It's nice to be off of Zoom and back in person. We'll be talking about a mid-year update for the current fiscal year 22-23, as well as discussing what our preliminary 23-24 budget looks like. We do have a few slides here that are a bit repetitive, but for the benefit of those that might want to go back and watch the recording of the meeting, I will go ahead and still go through them. So I just want to say thank you again to all the committee for taking time out of your day to participate on the committee and to volunteer your time. We do appreciate your feedback. I'm available anytime you have questions or comments, by phone, by email, whatever works for you. And I will serve as the staff liaison to the committee. So a bit of the Measure U background. It is a general purpose tax measure. It's a 1-cent transaction use tax that was effective beginning April 1st, 2021. The initial revenue was received in fiscal year 21. Our estimated revenue is approximately $14 million annually. That is updated based on the economy and the factors that affect the sales tax revenues. Measure U revenue and expenditures are tracked in a separate fund with any unspent balance remaining in that fund. And we have a citizen oversight committee. And then again, and spending is based on the community feedback and results of the fiscal and organizational sustainability study. So background on our, what we call the FOS, it's our outreach that we did during the Measure U process. We did engage in a lengthy fiscal and organizational sustainability study. It spanned over a few years with the goal of addressing the need for city sustainability. Basically, how can we fund what needs to be funded and be sustainable in the long term? Over the years, due to the lack of funding, we had insufficient staffing levels to meet our rising demand and service, very limited investment in building, roads, technology, staff, basically nothing for maintenance. The feedback from the committee included maintaining existing services and preventing service cutbacks to public safety, while also maintaining trained staff, being prepared for emergencies, repairing and maintaining our badly deteriorated roads, and also addressing homelessness. So staff then took all of that feedback and we distilled it into priorities into several categories. The first category, deficit backfill and workforce stabilization. I tend to refer to this category as general fund support. We were forecasting a pre-Measure U annual deficit of approximately $6.5 million per year. The funds in this category do go to support our services that are provided in the general fund, which span public safety, that's fire, police, and our street crews, our parks, our recreation staff. There's a whole variety of services that are funded and provided for out of the general fund. Workforce stabilization, this includes rebuilding our staffing levels and stabilizing the city workforce to improve our services and provides us the ability to move projects forward. It also allows the city to recruit and retain highly qualified staff that perform the day-to-day services. Infrastructure investment includes improving our roads, improving our bike and ped safety, our multimodal transportation, and improving city facilities, specifically addressing the need for a new fire station. And then finally, our priority initiatives are initiatives of interest, such as addressing homelessness, climate initiatives, and other projects and programs. We have established a Measure U fund to track revenues expenditures. The fund is classified as general in nature, which means funds are discretionary. However, spending is consistent with the community's priorities. Having a separate fund adds an extra level of accountability and transparency. The Measure U budget is adopted by July 1st annually, and our audited financial statements are required to be issued also annually by December 31st. So now we'll get into more of the detail about fiscal year 23 revised estimates. Fiscal 23 does represent a full year of revenues and expenditures. Revenues are expected to be slightly higher than originally estimated at $14.8 million. That's up about $1.3 million from our original budget. We are seeing recovery occurring sooner, and we have therefore adjusted the revenues. I've adjusted them at first quarter, and we just adjusted them last night. So there's typically 3 adjustments per year, one at first quarter, one at mid-year, and another at year-end. So depending on the trends that we see in our revenues, those could be adjusted up further towards the end of the year. Expenditures are expected to be slightly lower than originally budgeted at $14.9 million. And this is due to less needed in the general fund due to increased revenues also in the general fund. And as I mentioned, the fund balance remains in the fund, so the difference between revenue and expenditure will remain in the fund for appropriation by council. So this slide goes into much more detail. Historical and fiscal 22-23, we are focusing on the 22-23 year. But the other years are there for transparency. So this shows the budgeted revenues at the top, like I just mentioned, are about $14.9 million. That's up from the original $13.6 million. Expenditures are at 14.9 are largely unchanged from what was originally budgeted in '23, with slight reduction for less needed in the general fund. We did go over some of these categories in January, but just as a reminder, the general fund support provided by Measure U is critical to the operations of the general fund. It provides resources to maintain service levels and addresses our increased demand. Pre-Measure U, as I mentioned, we were estimating an annual deficit of about $6.5 million annually, with major cutbacks needed to balance the budget. So just for comparison, in realistic cutbacks of what that would look like, is that's equivalent to about 40 to 50 employees, which represents about 15% of our general fund workforce. So in other words, it is critical to the broader operations of the general fund. And then just keep in mind, this category fluctuates annually depending on the general support needed. We'll go over more of the project details on the next few slides, but in general, all of those capital projects that you see there are moving forward as planned. The SAFE funding of $250,000 has been critical in getting the SAFE program up and running, and has proven to be highly successful in providing specialty mental health support to community members, and relieving the police department from responding to mental health calls so they can respond to other emergency 911 calls. Bye-bye. The last category in fiscal year '23 is addressing the climate change initiatives, and includes funding for the continued installation of electric vehicle chargers. We are under contract with a consultant to do a study on our ability to install chargers at various locations, depending on our capacity. So that's underway. Also included is funding for climate outreach and our continued participation in the Evergreen program at Sonoma Clean Power.
Thank you. It seemed as if the FOS gave us community-identified city service priorities. And addressing climate change, I know, is very, very important. It's like the most important thing there is, probably. We need to live. But it wasn't one of the items. How could you walk me through how you add that? Did the public add that, or the city added that? I just wanted to understand.
The climate change category specifically? Yeah. It is a top priority for our city council, and it definitely was talked about, and I know Brian can expand on this during the Measure U outreach. It may be in the documents somewhere. I think we have it. What you're looking at is more of an abbreviated description of what the community interests are, but it is a top priority. It funnels through every conversation that we have here at the city, and our daily operations.
I just didn't understand how things were added.
Yeah, that was one of the original recommendations in the Measure U implementation plan. And I would echo Corey. I mean,
should you add it to that?
Well, those were the ones that were initially adopted in the ordinance, so those are sort of not changeable very easily.
I totally agree. I just wanted to understand the process.
Yeah, so those are, Corey is accurate, I would say, in that many of those categories kind of hit climate change, whether it's a tangential relationship with climate change or a stronger one, such as safe, clean neighborhoods. Homelessness, our homeless community is very impacted by whether it's flooding or very hot weather events, those sorts of things. So there are many different aspects, I would say, within the those different priorities that do touch upon climate change.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Hart?
Yes.
Generally.
I think, do I understand then that if there is a priority other than what the community asked for, it can be added by the city?
Sure.
So the priorities that you're looking at, those 9 or 10, however many there are there, those were what was originally adopted. It was in the original staff report when Measure U was placed on the ballot. And if you read into the details of the actual ordinance that was adopted by voters, many of those are kind of verbatim in the recitals of the ordinance. So that's really baked into what the voters adopted. I think the question maybe that you're getting at is how do we as a city, whether it's staff, council, yourselves, decide what Measure U should be used on? And so those are more of the back and forth conversations that we have kind of every year as we go to through the budget process. We're having that conversation with council saying, hey, these are the types of things that we'd like to move forward with on Measure U. What do you think? Should we change something? So there are some on here, and I apologize, I'm looking at this just as I'm walking in the door, but a few of them, like our
Yeah, they're great things to have. I just wondered.
I was trying to think of something specific. So I'll make up an example here for a second. So for example, we might bring a recommendation for Measure U in the future to spend it on a specific piece of technology that we think is really going to help certain departments in the city. Maybe it's the fire department, maybe it's the police department. It could be all departments. And we're advocating that, hey, this piece of technology is really critical for the city to continue doing its job and to improve the level of service for the community. So while technology sort of as a bucket or as a program isn't really in that list that you're reading from, it is absolutely forwarding many of those goals because it's assisting those departments who are providing those services. So those are the types of discussions that we would have with council when we're making recommendations.
So you have those discussions
Correct.
with council. Thank
Yep.
you. Then my question
Thank you.
is answered.
And could I just note for the public's information and for ours that we have been joined by Assistant City Manager Brian Cochran about 5:20. Welcome. Welcome
Thank you,
to our
Chair
meeting.
Kirks. Appreciate that. I should have introduced myself.
Thank you. And does anyone else have a question at the moment? I have one. Okay, go ahead.
I was just curious why, under the categories turning basin, dredging, downtown public restroom, there's no budget number for that? Has that been put off or?
Because it will be in the following slides for 23, 24.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, thank you.
And could I just briefly ask, and you may have already explained this, so forgive me if I'm forgetting or not understanding, but so at the end of a fiscal year, if there's, say, $4 million that of Measure Use revenue that would not be allocated, what happens to that? Does it just roll over to the next year? Do you go to the city council to say, we have $4 million of revenue that hasn't been allocated, so would you like to creatively consider some other uses, or what's the outcome for that?
A combination of both. So it does stay in the fund. It will be in the fund balance in the Measure U fund. And then what typically happens is during the budget process, we bring recommendations to City Council for consideration.
And so it's actually then the city council's role to give you guidance or direction as to what might occur for additional expenditures or additional projects.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, shall we continue? Great, thank you.
Okay, I think I'm finished with this slide. So moving on. So this is just another way of looking at the revised expenditures by category. So 65% of the expenditures are for general fund support, workforce stabilization. 31% is for infrastructure investment, and the remaining 4% is for priority initiatives. So this is the final slide related to fiscal 23. It's a project status update as of this month for the projects that are funded in 23 by Measure U. So infrastructure investment, again, this is road improvements that are occurring, well, not right now, but they will be occurring all throughout the city. We did issue $20 million of bonds in 2021, which provides that necessary capital up front to fast track some of these projects. There is another bond issue expected in fiscal 24-25 for another $20 million. So that 5 million of that is planned to go to roads, and the other 15 million is planned to go towards a fire station replacement. The library fire suppression system is necessary to not only provide a safe environment at the library, but also to meet fire code. It is a joint program with Sonoma County Library and includes not only a fire suppression system, but other improvements. We did apply for a grant that we were successful at obtaining, so we were awarded funding, and the overall project budget for this project is around $4 million, and it's currently in design. The Petaluma Community Baseball Field is currently in phase 2 of the project timeline. This phase includes viewing areas, dugouts, amongst several other improvements. This funding of $154,000 does allow the project to move towards completion of phase 2. And the overall project budget is estimated at $7 million. And I believe that project is estimated to be completely finished by next fiscal year. And then finally, the information technology team is currently interviewing potential consultants to draft a very thorough list of our needs that will be included in a request for proposal. We just had interviews yesterday, actually, or was that today? So anyways, this is under process, and it will take several years to implement. The cost of the new ERP system is significant, and it's probably going to be upwards of $1 to $2 million to replace. So moving on to the preliminary budget for fiscal '24. Again, this is preliminary. This could change, but this is what we have right now. So our full year of Measure U revenues are estimated at about $15.8 million. This is up about 6% over fiscal '23. This is developed with our sales tax consultant. As I mentioned, if you're looking at it in comparison to prior years, the prior year of 22-23 could be revised before the year is over, so that 6% growth could be a little less looking out into towards the end of the fiscal year. Expenditures are estimated at $20.2 million. $12.9 million is programmed for the general fund support to maintain and bolster our existing service levels. This category does fluctuate from year to year, as I mentioned, based on changing assumptions. General fund revenues and expenditures are revised throughout the year and updated during the budget development. Depending on what the general fund revenue levels are and our unexpected costs that we could incur, the need will change from year to year. So as the general support changes, so does allocation for Measure U. While we forecast what is expected to occur in the general fund, other unexpected needs and events arise that change those expectations. So for example, we anticipate salary and benefit costs from year to year. However, labor negotiations and certain benefits such as retirement costs could change those assumptions and result in changing needs and support that the general fund needs from year to year. Factors such as one-time capital needs and increases in insurance also fluctuate from year to year, which will impact this category. And then, of course, we seem to be encountering emergencies on an annual basis these days, so those unanticipated costs could also have a direct impact on the general fund. The beginning balance carrying forward from fiscal '23 is estimated at $4.5 million and provides resources in fiscal '24 to purchase needed capital equipment in the fire and police department, increase our park maintenance activities, and also will allow us to address our technology needs citywide. This larger than expected fund balance also allows us to program funding for additional priority initiatives over and above what was originally anticipated, which we will discuss. So moving on to the infrastructure category, we continue to program money in this category for ongoing road improvements and also includes ongoing funding for our debt service. $268,000 of additional funding is programmed for that library fire suppression system we just discussed. That estimated cost is expected at $930,000. And so we are bumping that funding up to allow us to move forward with the fire suppression replacement. 692,000 is for a variety of technology upgrades citywide, including a new phone system, cybersecurity to protect our sensitive data, and systems that assist with all departments citywide. 700,000 is programmed for dredging that is necessary under the docks ahead of replacing the deteriorated docks in the turning basin. This will repair the docks to a safe condition and allow for full use of the turning basin. 775,000 is program for our downtown beautification project, which could include lighting, tree well replacements, and street furniture, and also installing a much-needed prefabricated public restroom downtown. Our historic downtown is the heart of the city, and these improvements will make for a more enjoyable and safer experience for all. And lastly, in the project category, 650,000 is programmed for maintenance dredging. We actually have a maintenance dredging program, and it is critical in maintaining the appropriate river depth and width to reduce possible flooding during storms. This program will be funded into the future by our transient occupancy tax, and will ensure that every 6 years dredging is completed with the funds that have been set aside for this purpose. Moving on to the priority initiatives section. So 200,000 of ongoing priority initiatives include efforts for climate change. We continue to program 200,000 for electric vehicle chargers. The power backup at the police headquarters is expected to be more costly than originally estimated. Therefore, this additional funding is needed to secure the critical power backup that we use during emergencies. The police department does serve as our EOC, and so it is critical to have dependable power. Emergency preparedness continues to be a top priority for our community. In this category, there is 50,000 of funding set aside for a wildfire mitigation program, which will provide the community access to vegetation management recommendations and also provide for a chipper program. Also in this category and critical to responding to emergencies is having adequate equipment and dependable vehicles. So there's 300,000 included to equip one of our new fire engines with all the equipment that is typically on a fire engine so that it can be used to respond to calls. And in addition, and lastly in that category is 639,000 to replace police vehicles that are past their useful life and are no longer dependable. And then finally, the city will be rolling out a program in the new year to provide fare-free transit to all. There will be more information about this program once staff develop the program. At this moment in time, I don't have a lot of details, but we do anticipate that to be brought to council and more information available when the program is rolled out.
Hey, excuse me, questions? I have a few questions. From that, any questions? Ms. Hart, would you like to go?
Thank you. Let's see. Let's start here. The general fund support has gone up. So it's $6.5 million about just to keep Petaluma alive. And then it was $4.2 million to add 11 employees at about $400,000 a person. But now it's jumped another $2 million $2 million. And I heard you talk about insurance and things like that, but that's about $600,000 a year for those 11 employees. I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little
Sure.
bit.
So the change from the general fund support from 23 to 24 encompasses many changes. And so as we go through each budget cycle, we identify what the needs are from year to year. And so there are costs that go up from year to year, as I mentioned, and there were also costs that we weren't anticipating that also need to be included. So there's quite a bit of parks maintenance costs included that are driving the bulk of that increase. So there is significant funding for all of the categories that I will mention. There's funding programmed in 24 for animal grazing. We'll have increased costs for all of our janitorial services. There is funding set aside for gopher abatement in all of our 48 parks. There is weed abatement funding set aside, and various other parks maintenance type costs. So that's just one example. And then on top of it, we do have increased costs related to salary and benefit changes, and also a few new positions that we are adding. So there's a park maintenance position that is going to be added. There is a fire training captain and a police sergeant. So while the general fund does support part of those costs, a piece of it is also funded by Measure U. So all of that combined that's in the general fund ends up being partially funded by Measure U.
Thank you for detailing that.
So Corey, I think the confusion comes in that category includes new staff as well as new programs. And I think this committee is just concerned that part of their job is to know how many new positions are we adding and at what cost. Is it possible in the future that under that category we have a subcategories for additional staff and benefits versus additional programs?
We can.
I mean, not to be glib, but weed abatement and gopher abatement does not belong in the same category as staff. And so for those of us, we feel like our job here is to say, where is Measure U going? If we talk to somebody on the street and they want to know where does it go, if there are other categories mixed in with staff, and we're telling people that it's costing $600,000 to hire a new employee, the public gets a little antsy at that, when in fact that's not the case.
Right. So I'm going to try to explain it a different way. So we have what the community interests are, and this and Measure U was initiated and rolled out as the community explained where they wanted the funds to be spent. And that was at that point in time, right? And so we were looking at a deficit in the general fund of about $6.5 million, and that was an average over a span of years. And so the general fund deficit includes all kinds of services, so the types of services that I just mentioned. So all the parks, all the janitorial, all of the fire, all of the police, but it also includes staffing. And so I think the easiest way to kind of think about this is if you were to look at the general fund, which in the budget document, the general fund forecast, and if you look at the 24 year when it's all updated, you will see that of all of the revenues that the general fund receives, Measure U represents about 20% of the overall revenues. And we adopt a balanced budget, which means Measure U supports the general fund expenditures at about 20%. And it changes from year to year depending on what those needs are. And I just go back to what you're requesting to break it out. It gets kind of difficult because in some way, Measure U supports all of the various categories in the general fund because that deficit is made up of revenues and expenditures. And included in those revenues and expenditures are a whole variety of costs. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of an easier way to think about it for that one line item.
And Corey, do you mind if I jump in for a second? I would just add on to that a little bit and say, absolutely, yes, we can break out the individual items that we're adding in any given fiscal year. But what I think starts to get confusing is as we move out into future fiscal years, it does get a little trickier to continue to identify those things that were added in prior fiscal years. And I'll just throw out a quick example. And I don't know off the top of my head how many sergeants currently our police department has. Let's just say it's 6. Okay.
It's 9.
Oh, it's 9. Okay, so we had a few more than I was guessing, but so we have 9 sergeants now. Corey mentioned earlier that one of the planned additions for the upcoming fiscal year is another sergeant, so we would be up to 10. Well, so we could line item that out like on a chart, sort of like you're viewing now, and say, okay, in this year we're adding a sergeant. Well, unless the city is doing some future layoff or something like that, where we're going back down to 9, that 10th sergeant is going to continue to be in the budget, for many years to come. So it becomes a little challenging as staff to figure out what's easiest for the committee. Maybe 3 years from now, are we still going to be showing all of those individual line items that were added as ongoing costs that were identified specifically in Measure U in that particular fiscal year, when in reality, that's really just the new operating normal for the overall police department budget. And so that may just be a better cost that's reflected in the overall general fund budget for the police department, but it's in that bigger bucket of deficit reduction or general fund support, because it is kind of supporting the overall police department operations. So that's just one example of how we're thinking about it.
What about perhaps adding on page 10 and 11 in the general fund support, just a little bit of a description that says 20% is going just to support the O&M or the general fund maintenance, I guess. It's mostly.
I'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Could I just ask, based on what you just said, Brian, so let's say the new sergeant is hired, salary benefits that accompany that hire, are you saying that that person would be funded from Measure U long-term and would continue to appear in the budget each year as a Measure U funded position?
Well, that's kind of the question I was asking, yeah. And so it does become a little confusing because, so yes, one way we could do it is forever and ever, we're going to always have flagged in the detail, the behind the scenes accounting systems that Corey and her staff are maintaining, that this position is directly funded for Measure U. But operationally, the police department just sees they have 10 sergeant positions and they need to fill all 10. And, we have salary and benefits for those 10 sergeants. So at some point, I'm not sure that it makes sense to flag one specific sergeant position. And then there's another confusing factor that comes in where let's say you have one sergeant leave the department, they retire, they go to another agency, then you're back down to you have one vacancy and you're back down to 9 sergeant positions.
But then
So which sergeant position was that, was it a general fund sergeant? Was it a Measure U sergeant? And so those sorts of confusing factors, I think, are partially why, we're putting those additions in that general fund support, because it is supporting the overall operations of that particular general fund city department.
And I would just add too that just as Measure U revenues have gone up, as you see here, from 23 to 24, so have general fund revenues. So the general fund is supporting a portion of the costs that I just mentioned. And if you were to think about it, as I just discussed, it's supporting the majority of the cost. Measure U is providing 20%-ish of those costs. So it's, when we talk about these positions and additional operational costs, it's true, Measure U does support a portion of the cost, but it's not supporting 100% of any of those costs.
Well, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fisherman, but one of the things that I have been hearing from members of the public pretty consistently is the high percentage of annual revenues that are being utilized for what's described as workforce stabilization or hiring new staff, and the question of which I tried to pose as a layperson, does this sergeant's position, is that funded from Measure U, and will that be consistently funded? I do think it would be helpful to have a listing of positions with, what the salaries and benefits are and how Measure U is funding those, because the members of the public are actually asking questions about that. I think it would be helpful and to have that separated out from whatever the task or the services are. Would that be possible? Or go ahead.
I think we may be trying to get into too much detail as to what Measure U is actually funding. Perhaps a question could be asked in the future, as all of these funds get muddier and muddier and muddier. How will you identify how much of Measure U is going to deficit stabilization? And that might be the best way to put it, is we just need to know how much of the 14 million, the 15 million, hopefully our retail sales continue to grow and someday it's 20 million. How much of that is going to be lumped in to the deficit, whatever that deficit is? And how do we know that how do we know what percentage is going to go to all the fluff that we voted for, the new roads, the dredging, the new parks, all the good stuff?
And that information is in the budget document, and I think going forward, I will include it in the report. It's just typically I'm not finished with the forecast for Measure U by the time this meeting happens. But going forward, I think that would be really helpful. So I'll try to do that, because that does show, this upcoming fiscal year and into the future, 5 years, how much of the overall total of revenues is anticipated to go towards the general fund support / workforce stabilization. Yep. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Fishman, and I also think that members of the public would like to have a little more detail, if we can find a happy medium for, what departments have what additions, and, you saying what percentage of Measure U funds are helping to fund those positions. Also, I'd just like to say that for me, hearing from members of the public based on what you were describing, really happy to hear about the dredging fund, which Ms. Robinson brought up, because that's been a need, and we're hearing, there really needs to be an established fund going forward that builds and builds for that. That's really great. And the parks maintenance also, I hope, is for the function, parks and recreation function. I'm hearing a lot from members of the public about the need to expand support the Parks and Recreation Department. There are just so many additional needs that we are going to have, and I know that you get guidance from the City Council, but I'm hearing that, so that's really great to hear. And the emergency preparedness area is major, and it's really good to hear that we're focusing on that. And so that's just to give feedback to you as a representative of the citizens, that those are the 3 areas that I'm hearing very consistently that there are needs. So, okay, any other questions before we continue?
I'd like to ask just one quick question. I know a lot of us we're very concerned about the road improvements, and I'm just curious why the budget is less going forward than it has been, because it seems that we have a long ways to go.
So as I mentioned, we did issue $20 million of bonds, so that provides the cash that we need to prepare all of these projects, to get them up and going. And then we will have debt service out into the future. And so when the forecast was pulled together for Measure U, we had to look at what the general fund deficit was estimated to be out into the out years. So looking out 15 years. And as that general fund deficit changes, or as it was anticipated to grow, less was going to be set aside for the road category, knowing that in the upfront years, these early years, while we're putting more into the roads, that funding is for debt service. So we should be accumulating money for that category so we can then afford the debt service looking out in the years where our deficit is going to take up more of the Measure U funding. So while you do see it going down, that is really only to meet our debt service needs. And so the funding that was put away in 22 and 23, as well as 24, will allow us to meet our debt service needs looking out into the next 10 years.
Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to continue.
Okay. Okay, so just another way of viewing, just like we did for 23, this is for 24. 64% is programmed for general fund support, and then 29% for the road and infrastructure, and 7% for our priority initiatives. And again, this slide's a little repetitive, but for the benefit of anyone who may watch this meeting, accountability and transparency is one of our top priorities. We do our best to provide the data in a way that is simple for the reader. It is complex no matter how you look at it, but we do our best to make it easier to understand. We are committed to transparency through the many avenues showed here, our annual budgeting process, our audited financial statements, as well as through this committee. There is ongoing monitoring of the fund. 3 budget adjustments typically are brought forward to council, one at first quarter, one at mid-year, and the last one at year end. Much like staff turnover impacts private businesses, it impacts us as well. So we are committed to moving most of these capital projects forward, but so there are sometimes bumps in the road that push some of these projects out further than anticipated. However, all the project funding does stay in the project through completion. Any excess fund balance does remain in the fund and is available for future programming. Financial data is available in the budget and through the financial report if you're interested in reading it. And then finally, the finance department is always available for questions or obtaining other information. So looking forward, our next meeting would be scheduled for January of next year to go over fiscal 23 year end. We're currently developing the 24 budgets. As I mentioned, the City Council budget workshop is May 8th, and our budget needs to be adopted prior to July 1st to allow spending to occur. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Okay. It looks like we still do not have members of the public, but for the sake of our agenda and hoping for the future, let's open public comment for this presentation. The committee will hear public comment on this matter, and there will be no committee, commission discussion or action at this time. We'll allot 3 minutes to any individual if an individual were to be here. And so we'll open public comment, and seeing no members of the public present, we'll close public comment. And now we'll go to committee comment. Any committee members have comments, since we won't be meeting again until January of 2024?
May we just thank you all once again? That's a lot of work. It almost needs another staff member to keep up with that. So thank you very much.
Thanks for all the hard work and allowing us to serve the city.
Thank you.
I feel similarly. Thank you so much, and especially for meeting with us the day after a city council meeting. It's quite an accomplishment, just that in and of itself. And I want to say thank you to all the committee members for being here today. And hopefully, in the next iteration of the committee, there may be members of the public who will come. And with that, with no further business, we've already moved our other agenda item for minutes and approved those. We'll stand adjourned until next time. Thank you all so much.